Here's a sign that Jesus cares about your nervous system, and I'm going to show you how. In Matthew chapter 18, we see the disciples approach Jesus and they ask him an interesting question. And that question is, who's the greatest? And if we're honest, this is a question many of us have wrestled with at some point in our lives. But let's find out why the disciples asked it. In the previous chapter, we see Jesus taking Peter, James, and John up on the mountain to experience transfiguration. This moment highlights a few things, but we're just going to focus on one aspect. They were able to experience a greater level of access, a greater level of intimacy to Jesus, which allowed for greater revelation. The veil was removed and their perception was clear. The other disciples felt threatened because it revealed a level of intimacy that they did not have. They feared potential loss of belonging, loss of access, favor, position, and so forth. As a result, they began to compare. They compared themselves by asking the initial question, who is the greatest? Attempting to rank themselves. They needed to feel safe and secure within their position, within their belonging, access, and so forth. So they presented a hierarchical question to help them self-soothe or cope with the discomfort that the perceived threat created, which is what led to their dysregulated nervous system. But here's my favorite part. Listen to how Jesus responded. In Matthew chapter 18, verse 2, it says, "Then Jesus called a little child to him, set him in the midst of them." That's it. The most profound thing that Jesus could have done was brought a child into the midst of them, and that's it. So in this moment, Jesus interrupted their dysregulated nervous system, the threat of perceived loss, by disrupting the threat pattern, reassigning center and value, and introducing a non-competitive data. So what he did was he brought the child in, which disrupted the threat pattern. See, they were comparing themselves amongst themselves, but now you have a child in the midst of them, and they're engaging, they're actively looking at this child, and they don't see a threat because a child is not a threat to an adult. In the culture, the child has a lower status than them. So obviously it interrupts their thought pattern or their threat pattern, and then it reassigns the center. So he's bringing the focus on the child and removing the focus from them, right? And then he's introducing new information that's not going to be a threat to them. But I do want us to look at this. Notice that Jesus doesn't say to them, stop comparing yourselves, stop ranking yourselves. He silently collapsed this entire hierarchy. Jesus single-handedly regulated their nervous system by reorganizing the environment so the nervous system no longer needs to protect itself. The nervous system can't keep running that threat narrative while something unexpected and concrete is placed in the center, and that's what the child represented. Something to note. Comparison is a threat state, not a thought problem, okay? So this emerges when a potential loss of belonging or unequal access to favor or safety or attachment or even uncertainty comes up. So there's a process called neuroception, and it's the nervous system subconscious assessment of safety or threat. So that happens, and then comparison emerges out of that assessment, okay? So after Jesus regulates their nervous system by reorienting, he goes on to Matthew chapter 18, verse 3, which is the next verse. And it says, "And said, assuredly, I say to you, unless you are converted and become as little children, you by no means will enter the kingdom of heaven." So why did Jesus take action before providing this clarity and instruction? Because you can't teach effectively. You cannot effectively teach someone with a dysregulated nervous system. The prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for making sound decisions, right, is not active during a threat. Language processing even becomes filtered and interpretation becomes defensive. If Jesus had spoke first, the word would have been filtered through ego, anxiety, competition, and self-positioning. And this is often why, I'm just going to throw this in here. This is often why talk therapy alone stalls. Often stalls. I ain't gonna say it stalls all the time. Reassurance, sometimes offering reassurance to people, it doesn't land well. And even sometimes logic increases frustration when someone has a dysregulated nervous system. But once the threat was disarmed, Jesus began to teach the kingdom principles. He let them know that this kingdom operates on posture, not status. It operates on dependence on Jesus, humility, and teachability. Entry is not earned by competence, spiritual rank, or visibility, but a surrendered posture. And that is how Jesus shows that he cares about our nervous system and what he did to regulate it so that he could teach us.